When I entered the house, the door was ajar. A faint draft rustled the curtains, and the air was filled with a thick, suffocating metallic smell. It was the smell of blood. My fingers trembled as I took a step forward. The silence was oppressive, too heavy, too dense, as if time had frozen in this house. In the light of a street lamp, I saw a dark stain spreading across the wooden floor of the living room. I didn't want to look. Everything inside me begged to turn around and run away. But I had already taken that step. A body. It lay in the middle of the room, in an unnatural pose, like a broken doll. The lamplight caught the knife sticking out of the chest. I didn't recognize the face at first. It was deathly pale, almost waxy, with wide-open eyes, frozen in horror. But when I realized who it was, my heart skipped a beat. "No!" My voice was weak, trembling. I took another step and sharply inhaled through my teeth. There were bloodstains on the floor leading into the hallway. I was not alone. My fingers convulsively gripped the doorknob. Somewhere in the house, I heard a barely audible sound, as if someone had carefully moved, trying not to make noise. Breathing behind my back, raspy, slow. I froze. Then the silence exploded with a sharp whisper. "Don't turn around." My whole body tensed. My blood froze in my veins. That voice, it was familiar, but there was something new in it. Something dark, cold, devoid of all humanity. I disobeyed. I turned around and met the gaze of someone who shouldn't have been there. He stood in the dim light of the hallway, tall, hunched, with wet, disheveled hair stuck to his forehead. His face was splattered with blood. But it wasn't his blood. My lips parted, but the words stuck in my throat. "You shouldn't have come back." He stepped forward, and the floorboards creaked under his feet. I recoiled, my back hitting the wall. "What? What did you do?" I managed to say, looking into his eyes that were once full of warmth. Now there was only dark, bottomless emptiness. He slowly tilted his head to the side, as if examining me for the first time. "You always wanted to leave, didn't you? Start over." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Now you have that chance." I knew I should run. I should scream, break free, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was because I already knew the truth. "It was an accident," he suddenly said. "You have to believe me." He took another step, and I noticed that his fingers were clenched into fists. Blood had dried under his nails. "An accident," I echoed. "You killed," he interrupted me. "I protected us." His voice sounded so calm, so confident, as if he truly believed what he was saying. "You don't understand," he continued, now softer. "This had to happen. It was inevitable. I couldn't breathe anymore." "Don't look at me like that," his voice became raspy again. "Please." He looked confused, almost frightened. But I knew I couldn't believe that fear. It was all over. But not for me. Suddenly I heard a sound. Footsteps outside. Someone was approaching the house. "You won't tell anyone, right?" He took the last step toward me. I felt his warm, sticky fingers touch my hand. I gasped. The doorknob outside rattled. Someone was trying to get in. The doorknob rattled again. I froze, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. Seconds dragged on agonizingly slowly. He looked at me. His gaze was piercing, sharp as a knife, but at the same time, somehow, pleading. "You won't tell anyone." Those words hung in the air, and I felt their weight pressing on my chest, paralyzing my movements. "Who's there?" His voice was low, calm, but there was a threat in it. I wanted to answer, to say something, but my tongue seemed glued to the roof of my mouth. From outside, a muffled voice said, "Hey, is everything okay?" The person at the door knocked again, this time louder. I glanced at his hands. They were still bloody. His wrists were trembling. He was tense, preparing for something. What if he did it again? I felt sweat beating on my temples. Every cell in my body screamed, "Run!" But I couldn't. "It's the neighbor," I whispered. "It's Tom." He didn't take his eyes off me. "Tell him to go away." What? Tell him to go away. I felt my voice trembling. Tom, I had to clear my throat before I could continue. Everything's fine. I just don't feel very well. There was a short pause outside. Are you sure? I looked back at him. He nodded. Yes, I'm sure, I said louder. Thanks for checking in. Silence again. I heard Tom mutter something to himself and then footsteps, slowly fading down the porch. I couldn't suppress a convulsive sigh. He stepped toward me again. Thank you. I clenched my fists, trying not to show the trembling in my fingers. This is wrong. He blinked as if he didn't understand. What? All of this. Everything you did. He looked at me for a long time, then ran his hand over his face. You're making it complicated. I took a step back. Complicated? You killed someone. He tilted his head again. I did it for you. Those words pierced me. I shook my head vigorously. You shouldn't have. He stepped closer, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. Shouldn't I have? He raised his hand about to touch me. I recoiled. Don't touch me. He pursed his lips into a thin line, his face contorted in something like pain for a moment. I said everything is under control. No, I exhaled forcefully. You're losing control. For a moment he just looked at me, and then something changed. I saw it. In his eyes, in his expression. He no longer looked vulnerable. His face became cold, impassive. I can't let you go, he said softly. And then I understood. I had to choose. Run or die. I chose the first. Suddenly I turned and rushed to the door. Too late. His hand grabbed my wrist, pulling me back sharply. I screamed, but no one heard. Darkness closed in around me like a thick curtain, filled with fear and panic. I didn't know how long I had been there. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning. My pulse throbbed in my throat. My body ached from tension. I could only hear my own breathing, ragged, nervous, frantic. I tugged at my hands again, but the ropes only dug deeper into my wrists, causing a burning pain. He had tied me up. That fact hit me like a slap in the face. My mind raced, searching for a way out. How could I have ended up in this situation? How could he? The sound of footsteps. I jerked my head up. He was there, standing in the doorway, tall, calm, in his eyes, cold indifference. But I saw something else, something terrifying. He was pleased. You're awake. I remained silent, cursing the trembling in my hands. You should have listened. I clenched my teeth. You've gone mad. He slowly shook his head. Number, I understand everything perfectly. He took a step closer, his shadow sliding across the floor, and I wanted to move away, but I was cornered. I don't want you to be afraid of me. His voice was almost gentle, soothing, as if he were talking to a child. I clenched my fists. You killed someone. He tilted his head as if considering my words. Yes. A simple statement of fact. No remorse, no pain in his voice. I swallowed. Why did you do it? His lips twitched in a faint smile. Don't you understand? All of this? He gestured around the room, the space where I was a prisoner. I'm doing it for us. I shuddered. What us? He leaned closer. Us, he repeated, his voice softer, almost tender. We can fix everything. We just need a little time. I felt a chill run down my spine. You don't think that we... I do. My breath caught. You don't understand, he continued, his voice strained. You're still clinging to false boundaries. You're still seeing a world that no longer exists. You've gone mad, I whispered. He abruptly stopped, as if those words had struck a nerve. The room fell silent, too silent. I heard him inhale. I knew you would say that. He straightened up, his face cold again. But it doesn't matter, we'll fix it. I tugged at my hands, trying to free myself again. You can't keep me here. He looked at me with a long, scrutinizing gaze. And who will save you? I shrank back. They'll look for me. He smiled faintly. They already are. I held my breath. What? He leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "They're looking for you, but they won't find you." My lips trembled. "How dot dot dot?" "I've thought of everything." His voice was proud. "I had enough time to prepare." I couldn't breathe. "But," he gently placed a finger on my lips. "Shh." I froze. "You just need to accept it. It's inevitable." He leaned even closer. "I gave you a choice." I clenched my teeth. "You took away my choice." "No." His eyes flashed dangerously. "I gave you a chance. You refused." I felt panic rising. He noticed. "I don't want you to be afraid," he whispered, running his fingers over my cheek. I turned away, but he grabbed my chin, forcing me to look into his eyes. "You'll get used to it." I shook my head. "Never." His smile vanished. "We'll see." And he left, closing the door behind him. I was left alone, a prisoner, and only one thought pounded in my head. I have to escape. Silence. It was so thick, so enveloping, that it seemed like it could choke me faster than any ropes. I sat on the floor, leaning against the cold wall, my hands still tied, but blood finally began to circulate again. My fingers tingled, my temples throbbed, and my heart beat so loudly that I was afraid he would hear it. I had to get out. That thought became my mantra. I heard him pacing somewhere behind the door. His steps were steady, confident. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew I wasn't going anywhere. But he was wrong. I began to slowly move my wrists, twisting them so that the rope would loosen slightly. Each movement sent a sharp pain, but I couldn't allow myself to stop. I closed my eyes, trying to focus. Think. What do I know? I'm trapped. He killed someone. He thinks this is for us. He's sure I'll give in, but most importantly, he doesn't think I'm capable of resistance. He sees weakness in me. That's his mistake. I heard the lock click, and my blood froze in my veins. The door slowly opened. I closed my eyes, feigning helplessness. "You haven't eaten." His voice was gentle, almost caring. "That's bad." I didn't respond. He took a few steps, approaching. I smelled it, a mix of clean soap, light cologne, and something metallic. Blood. I clenched my teeth. "Are you mad at me?" I parted my lips, forcing my voice to sound weak. I just don't understand." He crouched down beside me. "What exactly don't you understand?" I forced myself to look at him. There was something strange in his eyes, something broken. "Why are you so sure that I will accept this?" He smiled as if I had asked a childish question. "Because you have no choice." Those words, said with such confidence, ignited a fire within me. I pretended to think. "If I accept this," I swallowed, making my voice softer, "will you let me go?" He was surprised. I saw it in his eyes. "You want to accept this?" I forced myself to nod. I'm scared. You scare me." That was the truth, but he heard something else. He smiled. "I don't want to scare you." He reached out his hand and I flinched. That was my mistake. His smile vanished. "You're lying." I held my breath. "No." He grabbed my chin sharply, forcing me to look into his eyes. "You are lying." I felt his fingers digging into my skin. I pretended to break down again. I shrank back, whispering in a trembling voice, "I just need time." He looked at me intently. "Time?" I nodded. He exhaled. "Fine." I didn't allow myself to relax. "Really?" "Yes." He stood up, stepped back. "But if you try to deceive me—" He didn't finish, but I didn't need to hear the rest. He walked to the door. "Get some rest." I watched him leave, and only when the lock clicked again did I allow myself to exhale. I had bought myself some time. Now I needed to figure out how to escape. The silence was deafening. I sat on the floor, waiting. My wrist throbbed with pain, but I barely felt it. Every movement was slow. My thoughts swirled in a chaotic rhythm. Soon it would all be over. I looked at the door. It seemed both close and unreachable. He had left, for a while, but he would be back. And if I didn't escape now, there would be no other chance. I took a deep breath, slowly moving my hands. The rope had loosened. I had been working on it for hours. Now all that was left was to act quickly. I heard the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds. 1, 2, 3. I tugged. Pain. A deafening ringing in my ears. I felt the rope give way. Not completely, but enough to slip out. I unclenched my fingers, wiping my wrists on my pants, and then grabbed the edge of the chair, pulling myself up. My legs trembled, but I didn't care. I approached the door, pressing my ear against it. Silence. Now or never. I grabbed the nearest object, an old porcelain figurine on the bedside table. Holding it was awkward, but it was something. With trembling hands, I turned the handle. The door opened with a slight creak. I froze. Carefully, I peeked into the hallway. Empty. I took the first step, then the second. My heart pounded so loudly that I was afraid he would hear it. I walked down the dark hallway toward the exit. If only I could reach the door. But then a voice sounded behind me. Did you think it would be that easy? I froze. He stood by the wall. The shadow hid his face, but I knew that voice. Slow, confident. He didn't look surprised. He had been waiting. I knew you would try. He took a step toward me. I clutched the figurine. Don't, I said, and my voice trembled. You don't understand. He shook his head. All of this is for us. For us. I wanted to scream, but instead I struck, with all my might. The porcelain shattered, and he staggered back, clutching his head. I didn't wait. I ran. To the door. I tugged. Locked. The key! Where's the key? I heard him breathing heavily behind me. I turned around and saw his eyes. Wild. Full of something inexplicable. You won't get away. I lunged to the side, grabbed a vase, and threw it. A loud crash. Screams. He fell. I saw him pressing his hand to his head, blood trickling down his fingers. But I didn't stay to watch. I rushed back to the door, feeling along the shelf by the entrance. And the key. I grabbed it, turned the lock. The door opened. I ran out into the night, the cold air slapping me in the face. Freedom. I heard his voice behind me. Don't go! But I was already gone. I survived, and he would never find me again.